Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on email thread visualization and workflows. My name is Bill Bailey. I'm on the solutions team here at Kcura, and today we're going to go over the new email thread visualization tool and talk about how it can be used in some of your email thread workflows to enhance your review and give you some more additional visual insights into the review process when you're running email threading. So, quick housekeeping item. If you can hear me and see my screen, please enter yes in the question window. Excellent. Lots of yeses pouring in. Good to see. And it looks like all systems are go, so let's carry on. So the agenda for today, we'll start with a quick overview of the new email thread visualization tool, which became available in Relativity 9.5, and talk about how that's built on our email threading mechanism in analytics. And then we'll run through how you can incorporate email thread visualization in your email threading workflows. One thing to note, email thread visualization doesn't necessarily provide a different way to work with email threads. It really is an enhancement that gives you some visual tools to really to help and augment your current workflows, and we'll walk through those. So we'll talk about using email thread visualization to help you streamline and speed up your review, helping you in performing conflict checks during the QC process. Generally, while you're conducting QC review, how the email thread visualization tool can be useful, and how you can leverage previously coded documents when new documents arrive and you're doing kind of a rolling load and you have some previously coded documents and some email threads. We'll look at that. And then we'll have a little wrap up and some Q&A at the end. So one thing to note, please, as you have questions as they occur to you during the course of the webinar, feel free to type them into the questions box. I'll probably try to address questions at the end of the session in our kind of Q&A and wrap up, but please type them in as they occur to you. Great. All right, so quick little overview of email threading. Probably many of you are familiar with email threading, but the email thread visualization tool is built on email threading, our existing email threading engine and mechanism as part of Relativity Analytics. So I just want to kind of quickly walk through how that works and the pieces of that. Important to kind of have that understanding level set because email thread visualization will build on those existing components. So of course, email threading in general, it's going to identify and group your emails within a conversation. You have the ability to visually display the threads with their attachments. You'll see the system will point out and flag inclusive emails as well as duplicate emails. Of course, it's used to help you review in the context of an email conversation, which just in and of itself, by organizing the data, helps the reviewers move faster and more consistently. You can streamline the review by culling out or removing items that are either non-inclusive or duplicates, so just focusing on those inclusive duplicate emails. It helps you identify potentially missing emails so you can follow up if additional collection is needed, and in general it helps you perform the QC checks for consistency across your thread and just in general as you're conducting your QC review process. Email threading, it's been around for a little while, and this is before email thread visualization became available. This is kind of what we generally worked with. We have this email thread view with the email threading display, which organizes your data by thread and shows you some information about the nodes, the attachments, the inclusives, and that sort of thing. But now email thread visualization gives a new kind of mechanism, a new tool to use to visualize your email thread data. It's going to help you understand the story of your email thread by seeing the branches, where items branch off, where the conversations are happening. It's going to help you easily and quickly navigate to other emails in the thread. And it has a pretty powerful feature to enable highlighting, coding highlights. So you can turn that on and see visually at a glance the highlighting, the coding values and metadata values on your emails. It's going to help reviewers work faster and more consistently as they're making their coding decisions. It points out missing emails pretty quickly, helps you identify those, and in general, it provides this visual QC mechanism as you're doing your QC review. And we'll look at those. Those are kind of a high level of the items that we're going to dig into in a live demo. So just quickly, if you set up your email threading is part of structured analytics, so you need to create your structured analytics set. You run email threading in that set. Usually it's either going to be run alone or with textual near duplicate identification. We're not getting into, in this webinar, we're not going into the details of the setup and how you configure your email threading set, but we do have a lot of great online resources, webinars, videos, and documentation that dives into the details of that. You'll usually want to set up an email threading view for your reviewers, and then you're going to determine a review approach, and we'll go into this a little bit too. Are you going to only review those inclusive non-duplicate emails, or do you have some other approach? So the email threading view, this is the way it looks now currently. The threading display field has been updated to be consistent with the email thread visualization, which is available in the viewer itself. So the symbols and the kind of iconography are consistent. We see that the solid black squares indicate an inclusive non-duplicate email. White squares will indicate that it's a duplicate email. And then we have icons to indicate the email action, the forward, reply, reply all, and there's even a draft icon. And then we have the other fields that are kind of important just to keep in mind that remain the same as they've generally been, but you've got your email thread group identifier. That's how the threads are grouped together in that relational field. And then the email threading ID, which continues to exist, and it defines the individual nodes or segments, each piece of an email conversation. And this is still relevant because email thread visualization really kind of builds on this to give you the visualization of what we're seeing in this email threading ID, this alphanumeric kind of field. And again, we still have the inclusive indicator along with an inclusive reason and an indicator to flag an email if it's a duplicate spare. So just quickly going through some of these foundational components, the email thread ID, the inclusive email concept, and the email duplicate spare, because these are important things just to make sure you have a good kind of mental model or understanding of those as we dive into the email thread visualization itself. So the email thread ID, just to kind of quickly show, we saw how that's divided out. The first piece of it is going to be your thread ID, and then there's going to be a number of these 4-digit segments separated by plus or minus signs to indicate email, the segments of an email or prior pieces of conversations. Sometimes you'll see as highlighted here 001, that's going to indicate that the thread or the conversation branched off into a sub-branch. So this is two example documents that exist in an email thread and their threading IDs. So let's just see how this looks. If you kind of laid this out, you would see as we move along, these are the different nodes or segments. So we're at the third segment here, which is 000, highlighted in the EN56 item. And then as we move along, we get to EN56 here. And so this shows the prior emails in that would be contained within EN56 at the end of this email conversation. You see that when there's a minus sign in there, that indicates a missing email. That's right in the middle. We've got a question mark in that middle segment. That actual document isn't in our collection, but the system has determined that it exists based on analysis of that last document, that EN56. And then just to quickly illustrate, if a conversation were to branch off, we see that 0001 highlighted there, and that's going to branch off down here. Another conversation, maybe it was forwarded, and then we get to the EN63, and that's where you see the kind of the emails that precede it in its conversation thread. And these concepts are still, this is basically the foundation on which email thread visualization is built, and we'll see that. Then the concept of inclusive emails. So inclusive email, and again, this is probably familiar to a lot of you, but just a quick review. It contains unique content, essentially, that's not included in other emails, so it needs to be reviewed. The non-inclusive emails, their content, kind of the ones that come before the inclusive, are going to be contained in the inclusive, and so non-inclusive, the content itself doesn't necessarily need to be separately reviewed, since by reviewing the inclusive email, you're actually seeing the content from the non-inclusive emails. There's going to be an inclusive reason as to why the system marked an item inclusive. And then one thing to note is that when the system is flagging emails as inclusive, it's not taking into account the recipient's fields, the to, the CC, the BC. It's looking at who the sender is, the date, the subject, and then the content, the author, the body, and any attachments on the email. So just quickly, a quick review of the types of inclusive reasons. So typically or often you'll see the message, that's sort of when it's the last email in the thread, so it's containing the text of the emails that came before it. Sometimes an email in the middle of the thread will be marked as inclusive due to attachment because it has attachments that might have been dropped later in the thread, so you need to go back and review that email because it has attachments that don't appear elsewhere. And then the dreaded inferred, which happens, we see that when email systems insert confidentiality footers into the bottom of an email chain, which confuses the system because then it's comparing the original email to an email down the line, and the confidentiality footer is potentially confusing it. So here's just a quick illustration of that. So the first email on the left is the first one sent, and then we see on the right a response, but the email system by the responder down at the bottom has inserted this the footer information, and now the system, even though the authored content is contained in the email on the right, the system isn't sure because the email has inserted this confidentiality footer. So actually the system wants to be conservative to make sure no unique content is missed. So it's going to mark both of these as inclusive. The one on the left, which is that root email, is going to get that inferred match. And so that's just an example of why that would happen. There are potentially there are ways you could try to remove some of these footers. If you see repeating patterns, there are regular expressions that can be run potentially if it is a definable pattern for that text and it's repeated. That could be useful for that purpose. Yep. Okay, so just a quick example, as we're going through, the system's going to look at these, it's going to look at the content, look at the attachments, and it's going to mark the ones that are inclusive, either based on the content they have or the fact that it has an attachment. So we see that second email in the chain has been marked inclusive because it has an attachment that was dropped, and then the two at the end, typically that you're going to see those at the end will be inclusive because they contain the authored content of the emails that precede it. All right, so then just quickly on the duplicate spare concept. So the system is going to flag emails as duplicate spares if they have the same content in the email from, the subject, the body, the sent date and time, and the attachment, so that by looking at just one of a set of duplicates, you're covering or you're reviewing all the content contained in that email. Another thing to note, though, the recipients are not taken into account. So it's just the content itself. If recipient information is of crucial importance, the team may need to take a look at other emails, other duplicate spare emails to examine the recipients. Another thing to note, the system does rely on the sent date and time. So when it's matching up the duplicates, there is a window of time where it'll allow for time zone variations or server variations, where everything is the same but the date and time may be slightly different. It'll still match those up within that window of time. So the note there is when you are importing data or getting data, either processing or requesting data from another party, it's always important to get for the sent field, the email sent, get the date and time. And it's easier if it's in one field. You can combine them, but that's a little bit of gymnastics to do that, but it's possible too. Okay, good. So that's kind of our foundational overview. Let's jump into the live demo. So I'm here in my Relativity environment. I'm on my Documents tab. I put together a view, an email threading view that displays some of these key fields, the email threading display field and some of the other key email threading information. As we saw before, we've got the new look and feel of the email threading display to indicate our inclusive non-duplicate emails, the icon to indicate the email action, reply all, reply, and so forth. There's an indicator, an icon indicator to show whether an email has attachments, and then the attachments are shown below the email, kind of an indented format. So similar to what we had previously, but just kind of updated to be consistent with the email thread visualization look. And on that note, let's go into email thread visualization. So that the tool is available from within the viewer. So to access email thread visualization, you go view a document in the viewer. You can view it in the native viewer, extracted text, image viewer. Any of the viewers will have it available. And to see it, to bring it up, there's an icon down in the bottom right here to show hide email thread visualization, and there we have it. So let's walk through the key components of the email thread visualization. We see the legend appears by default, indicating again, as we kind of talked about, dark blacks or solid black is inclusive, non-duplicate. The white boxes are going to be your non-inclusives. Anything that's missing is going to be indicated by a question mark. If we have duplicate spares, it's going to be this kind of stacked box look, the stacked squares to indicate there are more items behind it, and then the attachment icon indicates that the item has attachments. And you can see right off the bat here, the structure of the email thread is kind of clearly presented. We see kind of the main branch going forward here. We see where the conversation might have, where it branched off down below here and branched off yet again. So you get a quick kind of sense or overview of how this conversation evolved and where it branched off. Let me pull up over here. We still have available the thread group related items pane. So that's there, and again, it's updated with the new iconography. And sometimes it's good as an additional check or indication of where you are in the overall chain, but you can have that up there at your discretion. As you navigate through, you can click on an item to navigate to another node. You'll see that the location in the overall chain is indicated or highlighted in your email thread display. Some other things to note here: when you hover over, we saw that flash up, you get some additional information. You get some email, some of the email metadata. You've got the control number. You've got the email from, the sender, and the sent date and time. And a kind of interesting thing there is typically, when you're setting up your email threading structured analytics set, you'll map your metadata fields, your email from, date sent, and all that on your analytics profile, so the system will use those as it's parsing through and setting these fields. And if you have those fields set and the metadata is populated, that's what we'll see here. But there are cases where maybe you didn't get complete metadata and you're going to rely on just the extracted text. You can run email threading without using the metadata fields. If you get, you receive a set that doesn't have good metadata, it's still possible to run email threading because it's going through and it's parsing out the text. It's looking for the from, to, all the sent date from the actual text itself and parsing that out, and it can actually fill that in. So even if I didn't have my fields mapped, the system could, if the text is good, still populate the from and sent date here. So that's kind of cool. Then you'll also see if the email has attachments. That'll be indicated here, and that is a link, so I could bring that up right away. And if there are duplicate spares for this particular email, those will be listed here as well. Let's look at under display options here. You have the ability to set your highlight field. So I can turn this on, and then I have access to any of my single select or yes, no fields. So for instance, I can choose privilege designation, bring back my legend here, and then we see how the system has applied this highlighting overlay to indicate the coding on this particular field. So I can see here the blue items have all been coded as attorney-client communication, privileged for that reason. And as you can see, it gives you a quick kind of overview that this thread, it looks like the team has entirely coded this thread as privileged, and I see that at a glance with my coding overlay. And we're going to look at some variations, how this can be used in the different workflow scenarios. You can also mass edit from this screen if that's appropriate, if that's what you need to do. When you do that, you can go into edit mode here, enable mass selection, and then you can click and highlight and select the items you want. If you hold your shift key, you can do an entire branch if you'd like. You see the numbers, the green numbers here. That indicates how many items are selected and will be edited when you do your mass editing. So in the email thread visualization, we're looking at the top level parent email, but behind it there could be attachments or duplicate emails. And when I select a node, I'm essentially selecting everything in that node, which is the entire family of that email, its attachments, as well as any duplicate spares and their attachments. And the number in green tells me how many items are selected in that node that would be acted on when I do mass editing. To edit, click on my edit icon and bring up my mass edit screen, just like mass editing from the document list. I could tag these as needed. I can zoom in and out. So I have these plus and minus icons here. I can also use my scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom in and out. So when I have a really big thread, which we'll see some examples of those, that can be convenient. You then can just reset to get back to a kind of a default setting. Let's look at one other item here. Now, folks sometimes ask, can this kind of panel be popped out into a separate screen? And at this point, you can't pop this out itself, but you can. I'll just illustrate one thing you can do. You could try this, see if this works for you. You can launch the standalone viewer. So if I click here to launch my standalone viewer, put it into sync mode, what I could do here is I can just kind of collapse that to get that out of the way. So now I've got a pretty full view of my document, of my email. And then if I have a largish thread, I can have that here. I could set that here. If I had two monitors, that might help too. And I can then navigate around using my my email thread visualization to go from document to document. So just something to maybe try out, see if that works for you. Close that up. You can also, of course, navigate with the viewer navigation. So as I go next and previous up here, I go from doc to doc, and you can even see how it's moving down the list on my email thread pane. And this is one other thing here, speaking of the email threading, the thread group pane on the right here. One thing that's handy for is, so when I have a node that has attachments, I can see here that this threading pane will show me those attachments. It'll list them out for me, so some additional information that's available there. I can also pull up my attachments pane, my family pane, if I want. So now I can see for that node all the family items, the attachments it has. All right. So that's kind of the quick overview. One other thing I'll mention here, as far as kind of permissions, there are not separate permissions for the email thread visualization. So essentially, users who were able to work with the email threading display and email threading, they're going to have the ability to see the email thread icon and bring that up. If you did need to lock this down for a user, one possible way to do that is to lock down email threading altogether. You could do something like lock down the relational field for the email thread group. That's going to disable the relational pane. It would disable the thread group display as well if you really needed to lock that down. Okay. All right, let's reset. Let's go back to our deck, and let's talk about some of the workflows. So this is kind of like, this is using email thread visualization on top of some of our kind of existing workflows that we talk about. Some of the main things you want to review by thread to keep your email thread items together. That's a common approach to utilizing email threading in general. And there's kind of two high-level basic options. You can either provide the entire email thread to your viewers. Some folks do like to do that. Some teams prefer that. Or you can provide just the inclusive non-duplicate emails. And that's probably maybe the more common approach or popular approach. Either approaches are valid based on needs. Obviously, limiting to just the inclusive non-duplicate emails does reduce the number of documents to be reviewed. Let's look at some of the kind of the pros and cons of these. So if you did want to do the entire thread, if that was the thing, the team wanted to do, you would set up your search to pull back the entire thread group. And then you'd probably want to instruct the viewers to focus on maybe on those inclusive non-duplicate emails first, those containing other content, but they're able to access and code the entire thread. So here, they have the full context of the conversation in their list. When they're working through, they can take action on all those items straight from the list or batch that they're working from, and they can see where things change, branches branched off, or participants changed. Some of the considerations, you need to kind of train the reviewers on how to most efficiently use that threading display field, what the icons mean and so forth, for them to most effectively navigate that. It's going to place a lot more documents typically in front of reviewers and just limiting to inclusives, and obviously that could slow things down. So a common approach a lot of teams like is you set up your search, your view to return just your inclusive non-duplicates plus the families, the attachments. So you're going to narrow the overall set, you're going to move faster, it reduces the noise and clutter, you're just focusing on those documents that have the content that you need to review. You don't really need special instructions per se because you're just putting the inclusive emails in front of the reviewers. Again, as we noted, the recipients are not part of the determination for inclusiveness, so if that's an important thing, who was on the conversation previously, that needs to kind of be examined separately. You'll also need, if you're coding just the inclusive non-duplicates, and kind of skipping over for the moment the non-inclusive or duplicate items, you do need a way. It's just a procedure to come back and edit the tag the other documents. If you're going to, again, this decision point, can you produce just the inclusive emails, or do you need to produce a whole thread? I think we seem to see more commonly that the entire thread needs to be produced, so then those items that weren't actually manually reviewed need to be tagged to be produced. A note on propagation. So if you're just looking at those inclusives, we generally do not recommend that propagation be applied. That's usually too blunt an instrument when you're talking about an email thread. Conversations can evolve. They can change from non-responsive to responsive, or privileged to not privileged. Attachments can be added or removed that could impact the designation coding decisions. All right, and so just a kind of quick illustration. If I'm just reviewing the inclusives only, I have originally 8 items in this thread. By focusing on the inclusive non-duplicates, I'm limiting that down to the 3 emails plus that 1 attachment for 4. So I've significantly kind of culled down the number of documents my team needs to manually look at. And then as far as batching, so a couple notes on that. Batching you could batch by thread. So if you are pulling back your inclusive emails with family, often you want to set that up to have your family field to include your email thread group. So you get that same result that we saw in the batch. You're just going to see those 4 documents, emails, and their family or attachments in your batch. A couple considerations though. If you are including thread group on that family field, it could often cause the maximum batch size to be exceeded because you're pulling in additional items. And if you're not limiting to inclusive and non-duplicates, you could potentially be pulling in a lot of items. So there could be a big variation in your batch size. Just watch out for that. The other thing to note, the batch data source, that save search that you're feeding into the batch set, has to contain all the documents, the threads, the families, and so forth that you want the system to work with, that you want to be batched. The batching isn't going to pull in relational items from outside a save search. And then another thing to note, that's kind of a whole other topic of discussion, but if you're using a unit field like custodian, so you're trying to keep custodians together, if you are also trying to keep threads together, it gets a little more complicated. You may pull in threads from other custodians. So just keep that in mind if you are using that unit field together with threading as your family field. All right, let's hop back over to relativity. And let's see, so let's say we want to set up our review for just focusing on the inclusive non-duplicate emails. So let's pull up a dashboard. So when we talk about email thread visualization, we have that particular tool in the viewer, but there are also other visualization tools that we can use in email threading, like our dashboards in the new UI. And as of a recent release of Relativity, we now have the ability to put these the analytics fields, the email threading fields, onto our dashboard. So I can kind of visually point and click pretty quickly construct the search that I want. So I want to focus in on inclusive email is yes. I want it where my duplicate spare is no. And then I'm going to include family to make sure I have my attachments in there. And so now I've put together the conditions for just reviewing the inclusive non-duplicate emails plus family. And I can then quickly bring up my save search, save this as search. You see my conditions are applied there. This again is in the new UI with our search builder. I can give that a name, call it my inclusive non-duplicate email search, and go from there, attach it to a view, etc., batch it out, whatever I need to do with the search. So let's go back. I've set this up already, though. I have a inclusive non-duplicates search that I've already set up. Let's just take a quick look. So this this search, just to kind of look at what's going on behind the scenes of this view, I've set up a search that pulls back my inclusive non-duplicates plus family, and that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm seeing here in my view. So I can provide this to reviewers now. I could batch this search out, and when I have my email threading view in place here, we see now that I'm just looking at my inclusive emails. So when I dive in, I'm going to be able to do a few things here. So now the system takes me right away to my inclusive email, the first inclusive email. We see that here. And as I'm coding, so say I'm coding on designation, I could put up the highlight for my coding designation field, my responsive designation. So if I'm coding on this field, bring up my legend, I see that currently none of these are set. All right. So now I can kind of start my coding. I'm looking at my my inclusive emails. Say that one's non-responsive. I can save and next. And then the system is going to immediately highlight that coding decision, so I get that visual reference, and it's going to take me to the next item in my list here, which is the next inclusive. So now let's say I'm looking at this, and the conversation is maybe taking a turn here. This one's actually responsive. So right now I get some immediate feedback with respect to my coding decisions in this thread. I can see that I previously coded, it's right in front of me here, this one as non-responsive. So now as I'm going, I may want to revisit that decision. Partly this will depend on my protocol, how I'm treating the thread, but it may, it may highlight that now this thread has kind of evolved from something else that is now, I'm seeing it in a new light. Perhaps now it really should be responsive, given what I know from the prior items. I can go ahead and change my coding decisions. So you get that kind of that immediate feedback on the fly. When you click, you can jump directly to a node. When I'm using my previous and next arrows, that's going to take me to the attachment there. Nice family photo, and then to the end of that chain. And then as I hit next again, it's going to take me to the next thread. So here, we have a couple things we can do here. I can expand this out to get a better view of that. I can zoom in and out to take a look at that. But here we see now, again, some interesting information. We see that some of this thread has already been coded. Maybe I had done this previously. Maybe another reviewer had done it. But I've got that information. I see that a good chunk of this thread, the other inclusives, have been coded as responsive. That could give me some good feedback, some good information as to how I need to or want to treat this current email. All right, and then one thing, another thing to note here: if I am just moving and coding from on my responsive emails, I will have to take another pass to determine how I want to handle the items that are, here we see, not set. So these non-inclusives are gray. they're not set because they're not part of our review here, our manual review. You'll have to either a review team member, case manager, project manager will want to then construct a search that pulls back the threads where all the inclusives have been coded as responsive, nothing's privileged, there's no other inconsistencies, and then go ahead and maybe tag that entire thread or all those documents that are returned, the thread with its family, as, say, okay to produce, or in some way flag those as to be included in a production, even though the non-inclusives haven't actually been manually reviewed, if the protocol or the requirement is to produce the entire thread, including the non-inclusives. One thing to note here on the display options, question came in. I'll try to, if some questions I can get to, I'll try to get to them. But the fields here are all the fields that the current user has access to that are single select fields or yes/no fields. So any of those fields will show up here, and then for single select fields, whatever choices have been coded on those documents will appear here with a legend, a color-coded legend for each choice. There is technically, if there's a way to set the color for a choice, but that requires some help from our support team to do that. Otherwise, we default to a set of colors per choice. Okay. All right, let's and like I said, you generally don't want propagation, because we saw in that other example where the reviewer coded it as non-responsive, then later decided there was a responsive one down the chain. If I had propagation enabled, that first non-responsive coding value would propagate throughout the entire thread, cause everything to be non-responsive, and I'd just move on to the next thread. That would not be a desired result, in most cases. And just one other thing we mentioned about the batching considerations. Let me just show you one thing quickly there with the batch sets. So I had set up a couple batch sets based on this set of demo data. So when I look at, here's a batching by thread, I've got my email thread group family members. This is just the inclusive non-duplicates plus their family, keeping the threads together. And in this small example, I said let's keep the batch size to 10 as a maximum. The system tries to do that, but it's pulling in the other items in the thread, so there's going to be variation. If you do want the team to review, if the team wants to review all items in the thread, you're going to see more variation. So again, max batch size of 10. In this case, all the items in the thread, keeping the threads together. It's going to pull 10 documents off the list, but then it's going to keep the threads together. So I could see a lot of variation in the size of my batches. Something to keep in mind. Okay, let's reset and hop back over to the deck. And one other note, so we'll get into QC conflicts. The email thread visualization is automatically enabled when you run a build of when you run the email threading build. So when you upgrade, you can run either a full build or an incremental build, or anytime you run a full build. That will enable. The system does need to rerun a build of the threading set to set there are some additional kind of fields behind the scene that email thread visualization uses, so you will need to rebuild your set. And then once that happens, the email thread visualization piece is automatically enabled. It doesn't have separate controls or permissions around it. It's going to be there. We mentioned that one way to potentially lock it down, but this would lock down all your email threading pieces to a viewer, would be to say for a group, don't give them permission to view the email thread group field. That would actually hide that email thread pane. It would not let them display an email thread view. It would not show the email thread visualization, and any search that references that field is going to error out. So that's kind of a really the lock it down kind of approach. There isn't really a way to just shut down email thread visualization on its own. Okay. So let's look at conflict checks. So this is another good way to use email thread in email threading in general, and email thread visualization in particular works well with this. So conflict check, it's like a family check. A lot of you are probably doing that for looking for potential coding inconsistencies from inside a family group, but it's just bigger. It's the entire thread. Typically, probably in your review, most inclusives are going to match. You're going to get matching. So here, just in this example, yeah, everything is consistent. That's good. That's something we hope to see a lot of. And the conflict check is a good thing. I think a good thing to do. But in review protocols may differ more with thread groups than they tend to do with families. Where often with families, it's like they're always produced together, withheld together. But threads, it is theoretically possible as it evolves. One part is responsive, one's not responsive. One area is privileged, the other is not privileged. So you do have to be a little bit careful about your conflict checks, but it is a good high-level sanity check to see where some conflicts occur. So one of the most common checks is responsive versus non-responsive. Another one is privileged conflict, where you've got in a thread one or more documents that have been marked as privileged, but there are other documents in that thread that are either, say, non-responsive, which may not be expected, or they've been tagged as to produce, or they just haven't been coded for privilege at all, but that thread contains a privilege. So maybe you want to double check and make sure everything is consistent and correct there. And you set up your searches. You set up a search that brings back your responsive documents, include the thread group, and then you'd reference that search and then pull back anything in that search where there's also non-responsive. So that's your conflict right there. And this kind of illustrates that we've got 2 responses and then 1 non-responsive down here. And these are often good to set up at the beginning of review to track your progress. It's often a good practice. All right, let's hop over and take a look how this might play out. So let me, I've created a view here for my responsive thread conflicts, and this is just going to do that search that I've set up, the kind of what we just saw, where threads that have a responsive and a non-responsive in them, and that's fine. It's pulling back just those items. So I'm asking it for, show me where there are non-responsive items, emails coded non-responsive in a thread that has responsive items. This does not pull back, this view or the search does not pull back the thread groups. I can add thread groups there, and then I see the whole context. There's that non-responsive, or I could just focus in on those items that are kind of the non-responsive conflicting ones. And when I go into them, this is where I can use email thread visualization to help me really pinpoint and eyeball those conflicts. So I could turn on my highlight field, and then I've got my responsive designation field selected there. And then for my legend, I can see yellow is non-responsive, blue is responsive, and right away I can see where that item, the one item that's not like the others, is jumping out at me. I can tag that for the team to follow up on. If I'm the reviewer, I could look at that and try to resolve that inconsistency. And again, as I navigate, it's going to take me to the next thread, and right away here's a really big thread. We can see those coding inconsistencies are jumping out right away in this big long thread. Again, I can zoom in and zoom out on that thing. And I can go through and investigate those, see if those were in fact incorrectly coded or what the situation is there, tag them for the team to follow up on. And likewise, just kind of quickly point out here, you can do this on as a privilege check. So let's say we've got a search here. I've created a search. This is going to be all the items that have been marked for privilege, plus the thread. So these are threads that contain privileged items. Now, what I'd like to see is the items that have not yet been marked as privileged. So this has privilege, and I want to see items that actually have not been marked for privilege or not privileged. So I have another dashboard here, so I could bring up, again, use all my visualization tools. I can go ahead here. Now this is, I'm seeing in my privilege plus thread, there are a bunch that are blank. So I want to focus in on those, click on those in that thread, in that pie chart. That's going to build out my search condition here. So it's the items that are have at least have a privileged item and an item that hasn't been marked for privilege in that thread. And again, I can drill into this, bring up my email thread visualization, and let me this time pull up my privilege. And so here, if I look at my legend, gray typically and generally means not set. So again, here I see the team has identified these as attorney-client privilege, but this entire area or this branch has not been tagged at all for privilege. So I want to check with the team, either see should these be marked privilege, follow up, or are these in fact, did the conversation really branch off into something that that became privileged where the core branch itself isn't privileged, which is again a possibility. Okay. Reset everything here and hop back. Okay. And so again, this is, as we've been showing, we're kind of building on workflows that you can do really today without email thread visualization, but we're showing how email thread visualization just provides another powerful level of the kind of visual analysis to help people work faster and more consistently. Email threading in general, you can weave into your QC review process, however you've kind of have that process structured. Include email threads in the documents that you're reviewing in your QC or your overturn analysis. You could sample inclusive documents to focus your QC efforts on just those inclusives, and then again, like we saw, focus on those threads with the conflicts, with the potential coding conflicts as part of your QC review. And so, of course, this is the kind of thing we're looking for, that kind of conflict. And let's just let's hop back over to Relativity. And I'll just show kind of just an example of something that could be done here. Let's say we want to set up. We saw how we can do conflict checks and include the threads in your QC review in general. But let's see how we can do that kind of a random check on, or develop a random sample of our inclusive non-duplicate documents. So let's pull this the email thread dashboard again, and I can have this prepared as a search, but let's just go ahead and say, okay, I want the inclusive and I want the non-duplicates. And now, in a real review, there could be a lot of documents here. Maybe I just want to sample from those to do a QC review, a QC analysis. I can go ahead and either do a statistical sample or just pick a fixed number and sample those. I could then save these as a list, preserve those for the team to review, easily convert that into a search, or even batch those out. When I go into these, now this is just a random sample of inclusive emails for the team to look at. I can turn on my designation field, my responsive field, and I can go through here, see what the current coding decision, and then get that overview of how the other items in this thread have been coded so far as I'm conducting a QC. And so I can click anywhere to examine documents, but as I do my next, that's just bringing back the items in the list of the random sample documents that I'm using for my QC analysis, and I can cycle through those. And as I'm going through those, I can see the kind of the overall lay of the land as far as the coding decisions that have been applied on these different threads. So kind of just a good tool to have as you're just doing what might be a standard QC kind of review based on a random sample of coded documents. And then one other thing to note here, let's reset this just to point out we can pretty easily identify the missing emails. So in the missing emails will have a minus sign in their thread ID, so I can actually just filter for these. I could tag these, save these off. When I go in to look at these, when I bring up my email thread visualization, I can maybe turn this off, and here I see, okay, I can see exactly where in the thread that missing item is. And I can trace it back and say, okay, this document was the really the item preceding it in the chain, and here it says, yes, the best explanation is attached press story. If I go through here, I can see, yep, there's that one, yes, the best explanation, there's that, the email here, that node, but here is the middle missing node that the system has identified by parsing through the text here, flagging that with that question mark, and I can actually see, okay, who this is from, who it's to, and the date. That gives me some additional information. Maybe we need to collect from some additional custodians, but at least I have that information about what's contained in that missing email. And I can continue to cycle through my threads and continue to examine the emails that are missing and get some context around that, which the email thread visualization really makes it kind of easy to do, helpful with indication of where those missing emails exist within your thread. Okay, I'd like to kind of wrap things up a little bit with one final workflow that people ask about a lot, which is leveraging previously coded documents when you load new documents into your workspace and you've already run email threading on the existing documents. So it's similar to the conflict check approach. We're going to set up two searches. We want to find the new documents that are part of a thread that was already coded, ideally as responsive, to kind of prioritize those. If new documents are part of a thread with privilege, maybe we'll promote those directly to second level or priv review team. If the new documents are in a thread that was only non-responsive, maybe we can deprioritize those. And obviously, when this is a scenario where you've loaded documents, you've run email threading, maybe you load another set of documents, do an incremental build of email threading to weave those documents in. Of course, the new documents may just be on their own thread. They may be a brand new thread, but they may get woven in with other existing threads. So it's really would be nice to take advantage of and know where where they fit within the documents that you've already coded. So you would, just a basic process: tag your new doc, tag, each load, tag those so you know which is in which load. You run your email threading on both. You would create a search where your responsive designation is set to responsive, and then include the thread group. Now you're looking at your entire load to date, and then you're going to do another search where you want to focus in on those documents that are in your new load, say in load 2, that are in those thread groups. And you set those searches up. I think you've probably seen the theme here, where you set up these two searches to include the thread group and then bring back the items that you're looking for. And so here, like the illustration would be, this came in first. I identified these as responsive, and then new documents formed a new branch down here. Okay, so let's take a look at how that could play out. I've got a view set up here, coded responsive, with thread, and I've actually put together a dashboard here. So here's a dashboard that shows me my coding decisions and my data load. So what I'm looking at now is these are documents in my entire, so I loaded volume 1 first, ran threading, loaded this volume 2, and then ran threading across the total, volume 1 and 2, to interweave the volume 2 documents into my thread group. This view is pointing to a search that pulls back all the documents I've coded responsive so far, plus their thread. And then what this is telling me right here, this widget, is that some of those documents are from the newly loaded documents. So this could be helpful. I want to focus in on those. I click those, and now these are the documents that are in threads that have been coded responsive. And I have a couple different ways of immediately visualizing that. I can, just to see which is which, I can highlight my data load volume, pull up my legend. I could see what came in first on volume 1. So we see the upper branch and sub-branch came in my initial load, and then I see here volume 2, we must have collected from maybe some other custodians, and those are sub-branches within this existing branch. When I highlight my designation, my responsive designation field, now I can see right away, yeah, these the ones here originally we had coded as responsive, and now we see some additional documents. So I can either focus on these now. I could tag these as the high priority documents to for the team to focus on. And again, like I mentioned, you could do this with privilege. If new items are in a thread group that has privileged items, maybe I just send those directly onto a second level review team. And items that are just in a thread that's entirely non-responsive, I can maybe deprioritize those, get to those, and maybe just confirm that those are also non-responsive. But finding these responsive ones can be really helpful to get those identified right away. All right, excellent. So we're kind of at the towards the end of time here. I'm going to go through some of the questions that have come up. We do have a lot of resources available. We have some recipes. We have a bunch of recorded videos that dive deeper into email threading and structured analytics. Highly recommend those. Let me look at some of the questions here that have come up and see if I can respond to some that haven't yet been responded to. Pardon me for a moment. And by the way, I invite you to stay for questions and answers, but if you need to drop off, I understand at this point. But I'm going to try to address some questions here. Yeah, some questions, again, come up around those recipients, like the CC, the BCC. If you're concerned, based on the nature of your case, that there might be some recipients, that you need to know if items further down the chain or duplicate items had those recipients on them or had those individuals as participating in it. You'd have to examine those other documents, either the duplicates or the documents further on down the line. There isn't at this point an automated way to do that. I know it's something our product group is looking into, how we can more, better kind of point out or display kind of like an all recipients field to show who was involved in that chain. But at the moment, you have to kind of manually inspect. This video is going to be, the plan is to make it available on the website at some point in the not too distant future, and everyone who registered will also get a copy of the deck as well. And propagating. So right now, the propagation on an email thread will propagate to every item that's tagged with that email thread ID, which is every item in the thread and the sub-branches. We don't, at the moment, we don't have the concept of like a branch ID, which would be kind of nice. So you could say just propagate to the branch, don't propagate to the other branches. I know that's something the product team has been looking into as something maybe in the future that they can do, but that does come up. But yeah, that's one reason propagation is not recommended at this point, because it does propagate to all your sub-branches in the entire email thread. Let's see, question regarding if a child is coded responsive, will it flip the parent to responsive? Now you can, if it is possible to propagate coding to family. And again, you'd probably want to proceed with caution on that, unless you have kind of a very strictly defined protocol where as soon as one is marked one way, they all get tagged that way. But yeah, you probably want to be careful with propagation on family as well. So emails that are attachments to other emails, when you set up your email threading set, you set it up in a way that you identify what documents are the parent emails, and then everything else is an attachment. So if there's an email that is not part of your parent email search in your set, the system will understand that email is an attachment to another email, and so it won't thread the email attachment. It'll just treat it as an attachment like any other Word document or PDF attachment. And visualization the email thread visualization will show it as an attachment to the email. This email thread visualization became available in 9.4 for on-premises. I'm sorry, check that, 9.5, which just came out recently. It's not available in 9.4 on-premises. Question about pulling in the highest indentation level. Yeah, you could. I believe you can run a tally to see like your indentation levels. There isn't a direct way to pull in. I mean, one way we've seen is if you want to find larger threads or threads that have a large number of nodes, you can run. At time, thank you everyone. I'll go through and see if there are any questions that we didn't address, but thank you very much for taking the time to attend the webinar today. Bye-bye.